Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Harmony Barker. I am the Public Programs Manager at Holocaust Museum LA, the first and oldest survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. We were founded in 1961 by survivors who wanted to create a safe place to display their precious artifacts, to remember their family members and loved ones who had perished, and to educate future generations on the important lessons of the Holocaust. Today, the museum continues to provide free Holocaust education to students from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of our founders to commemorate, educate, and inspire. Thank you for joining us for today's discussion about the documentary film Stranger Sister. Stranger Sister is the story of two ordinary women, one Muslim and one Jewish, who dare to believe they can join hands to stop the wave of white supremacist hate surging across the United States. With both their communities threatened, they overcome a long history of distrust between their two religions and build a movement that turns strangers into sisters. Intimately following women from Sisterhood of Salaam Shalom chapters across the nation, the sisters build a powerful network of hope, challenging our assumptions about how to fight hate in America. Filmed over the course of 3 years, Emmy-winning filmmakers Kirsten Kelly and Katie Tabor worked with sisters from across the nation to capture this powerful story. Joining us today to help us unpack the film's message and its lessons are Aziza Hassan and Marjan Kippur Greenblatt. Aziza Hassan is the executive director of New Ground, a Muslim-Jewish partnership for change. Aziza's work has been featured on Yahoo News, Public Radio's Speaking of Faith with Krista Tippett, the United States Institute for Peace, Arabic Radio and Television, and the LA Times. Aziza served on President Obama's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships from 2015 to 2016, and the Executive Service Corps recognized her with the Megan G. Cooper Leadership Award in 2017. Aziza currently serves on Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti's Interfaith Advisory Council and is a volunteer mediator with the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. Marjan Kippur Greenblatt is the founder and director of the Alliance for Rights of All Minorities, an international network of activists that promotes human rights in Iran. She is also a non-resident scholar with MEI's Iran program. Marjan is a member of the Anti-Defamation League's Task Force on Middle East Minorities, and she previously spent 7 years managing civil rights initiatives for the ADL here in Southern California. Her writings have appeared in Huffington Post, Iran Wire, and Newsweek, among others. Marjan served on the board of the Jewish Federation of Los Angeles from 2008 to 2011, and she holds a BA in sociology from UCLA and a master's in education from Harvard University. Before we get started, please note that there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the program. You will be able to ask a question by typing it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. It is now my great pleasure to welcome Aziza Hassan and Marjan Kippur Greenblatt. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, let's start with what were your initial impressions of this film?
So at first, oh, sorry, Marjan, please.
No, go ahead. I was going to ask you.
Thank you. So I was initially quite excited because the prayer that you see at the beginning, was actually a prayer that our individuals who went through our program actually started here in Los Angeles, where they prayed as Muslims and Jews side by side, starting from Santa Monica all the way to City Hall. Here in the City of Angels, and right here behind you, you see my eldest at City Hall with his prayer rug, and that it's just beautiful to see how sometimes a seedling you invest in it, and then like the seeds just continue to spread in really beautiful ways, way beyond your imagination. And actually, one of my co-workers is highlighted in the film because she leads the Jewish prayer service at Sisterhood of Salaam Shalom. Plus, it was beautiful to hear a woman called to prayer. And I feel like that moment especially stays with me. And so does this moment of like when they're all in front of the church and they're standing there, and they've done these, they've spoken to different people from the Southern Poverty Law Center and folks within like what it meant to be part of the civil rights movement. And the woman's telling them, she's like, does the story, it's like a jigsaw puzzle. Is the story complete if your story's not told? And I think sometimes we mute ourselves, and that is a big mistake. Every voice needs to be heard and every story needs to be said. And especially as we're trying to make sure that, like, for instance, I'm a city commissioner and we've been focusing a lot on LA for all, and a huge campaign around that. And what does it mean to make sure that we're lifting up all voices so that everyone truly belongs? And so those are things that I really appreciated from the film.
I also was really moved by the opening scene and watching the women participate in the Muslim prayer. So I am Jewish, but I was born and raised in Iran. And when the Iranian Revolution happened, the prayer was something that actually was happening everywhere around me. The call to prayer was always, announced with the voice of a man. So hearing it also come from a woman, it was very astonishing. And then seeing all the women praying together was also an interesting scene, because my association with prayer was something that was always imposed on Iranians. Because before that, before the revolution, Iranians were very secular. But to see that Jews and Muslims and women on their own were willingly participating in sharing of spiritual experience was very interesting. But I think what really moved me a lot about the movie in general was that we're coming from this moment of division and antagonism, where people of different opinions, let alone people of different religions, don't even talk to one another. Even proximity with people of different parties is regarded as disloyalty or enmity toward your own party or your own vantage point. And especially along political lines, Republicans and Democrats and everything between, they just have so much antagonism and negativity toward one another that you don't even see people who have a lot in common engage in conversations about what they care about and participate in sharing what they both believe and how they both want to build together. And to see women, Jews and Muslims, who are generally in this day and age pinned against one another so much, to put those differences aside and take a risk and come together to build something together, to understand one another, even at the most basic human level, was really refreshing. I began watching the movie because, again, I am surrounded by this intense division and antagonism. And I was a little bit anxious to see how it was going to evolve, but it was definitely interesting to see that there are so many courageous people who are still able to believe in the best things about human nature, which is kindness and compassion, and come together to listen to one another.
Yeah, absolutely. That opening scene is very, very powerful and very moving. And I'm glad you both mentioned that. For our viewers who haven't seen the film yet, just as a reminder, you will still have the ability to watch the film for another 24 hours. So you'll still have your opportunity. So going off of what you just said, Marjan, about how much division there is, and that what you took away from the film was this kind of hope or optimism about people who are trying to build across that divide. What do you think we can learn from the Sisterhood's model of interfaith dialogue and the communities that they're building? And, what are some of its strengths, but also are there areas that you saw in the film that you think maybe the Sisterhood might need to improve upon, or things that you would change in your own approach?
Yes. So I don't know to what extent there is a consistent effort in dialogue between, Muslims and Jews in America. But what I liked about this, I mean, we have all taken part in dialogues before, and I really commend Aziza for the work that she has been doing. But I think that there is definitely fear in engaging in this kind of dialogue and in this kind of understanding. And I actually, one of the things that I saw in the movie that was really moving was the woman who had driven an hour and a half to participate in this dialogue. And I was wondering to myself, in that hour and a half, what was she thinking about? What were the sentiments and what were the expectations that she was walking in with? And I think that when we engage in this kind of conversations, we have to realize that we're going to feel uncomfortable, and that's part of the expectation. And it is through the uncomfortable moments that actual learning and actual connections can happen in a meaningful way. So what the movie did really well, or what this process of engaging these women in dialogue does very well, in my opinion, is that they bring it to simple conversations about, basics of spirituality, basics of worship, food, which is always an easy and pleasant way to interact. And of course, Jews and Muslims have very similar, not same, but similar restrictions around food. And I think that creates also an easy way to engage in the conversation. And also, they avoided very difficult topics. So what the movie lacks is that we don't know where they are in this process of learning and engaging. And I would hope that this is just the beginning phase of what should be a multi-phase process of learning and engagement and reconciliation. And in further steps, I would believe that communities need to have also their own intra-group dialogues to process what they have heard and to think about, okay, how can we take this to the next level? What are some of the misconceptions that we had of ourselves or of each other, and how can we teach others in our own communities about what we have learned, and then take it one step further. So one thing that is very, very palpable in the movie is that they avoided talking about perhaps what is the most difficult topic between Jews and Muslims, which is the Israel-Palestine issue. And the leaders of the conversation were very adamant about drawing a red line about that topic. And to me, that was a weakness, but I think that perhaps it exists because it's premature, because they have not established the basic level of trust where they need to be before entering that level of conversation. But I gotta say that as a Jewish person, my Zionist identity is just an extension of who I am. It's part of what my spirituality and what my Jewish identity is all about. And I would hope that if I were to take part in my chapter of Salaam Shalom, there would be a way to also discuss this topic in a safe way.
Yeah, absolutely. Aziza, any thoughts?
I couldn't agree more. I think there's something to be said that sometimes when it comes to the difficult conversations, we let our fear get in the way. And maybe we want to serve the relationship, by saying that, we're trying to protect the relationship, but in the end, it actually undermines the relationship, and we can't talk about the very things that matter the most to us because we have to mute a part of ourselves. And when we mute ourselves, it actually hurts everybody. It hurts our ability to stay in the conversation, to be in the relationship itself. And I mean, this was filmed some time ago, and now the film is out, right? The editing process takes some time. And so New Ground has been helping the sisterhood think through and connect with resources on how to talk about Israel and Palestine, because we have to be able to talk about the things that matter, especially that subject and so many others. There's too much that's on the line. There's too much that's at stake, and we'll get to more of that later. But if we're going to be able to work together as allies, we have to be able to understand our pain points. And when we mute the pain points, we literally set ourselves up to walk the other direction. And that's something that we can't afford to do. And the sisterhood did get there and is trying, and it is hard. It is so hard. And that's kind of part of it, is continuing to stay at the table and come back to the table, even and especially when it's challenging, because those are the places where we ourselves grow and we're forever changed, and we can figure out how to work together.
I agree.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the film was made some time ago. It was filmed over the course of 3 years, from I believe 2017 to sometime in 2020, and obviously now it's out and circulating. So we do sort of see over the course of the film the attitudes of the founders and leadership shift a little from a firm stance of, we are not political, we don't go there, we don't want to talk about Israel and Palestine. It's a firm no. And then we see them start to realize that the situation in the world sort of demands that they address it somehow. And there's a scene in the film where I believe it's a board meeting of all of their leadership, and you can really see the difficulty that they're having in trying to make themselves have this conversation, even with each other, with these women that they're already close with and know quite well. It's clearly was a hurdle that they needed to overcome in order to provide resources for their larger community. So in terms of resources, what are some next steps that, Aziza, you mentioned some of the work that you're doing with the sisterhood but what are, for our audience members, what are some concrete small actions that could constitute next steps in trying to have difficult conversations like these within their communities, or with communities that they're trying to reach out to?
Sometimes it starts with just reaching out neighbor to neighbor. And I can't underscore this part enough, is that sometimes we just want to jump into the hard conversation and we don't ask permission. We don't say something that somebody else, look, I have something that's really important to me, and I really want you to be able to hear me. When is a good time? And actually crafting the space to be able to have the conversation is just as important as the conversation itself, because it also, again, allows for us to have capacity to be able to talk about it. I know that when I set my husband up and I say hey, we're going to talk about this, and I don't give him enough room, I'm setting up the conversation for failure. And so I think it goes across all relationships. And that's part of it. The other part is, many times we will reach out to the one other friend of another group, or even, the dissenting opinion within our own group. And that's an important first start. And similar to kind of what Marjan was saying about the intra-faith conversations and the importance of them, we have to have multiple conversations with multiple people with different backgrounds. We've been working with Deidre Stanton to talk about anti-bias and what does it mean to actually confront anti-bias, because I think that's one of the things that interfaith really has an opportunity, or not an opportunity, that can do really well, is that when we surround ourselves with different people who don't always match the stereotype of whatever it is that we are holding in ourselves, we start to interact and contradict that bias that's within us, that because it actually exists in everybody. It exists in brown people, it exists in Black people, white people, whatever, whoever you want to lump us into. Like, for instance, there's something, an exercise that a couple of years ago now, there was this big conference and connected around anti-bias work. And the presenter said, like, there's a surgeon, and a boy comes in to the operating room. It's an emergency, but the surgeon says, "I'm sorry, I can't operate on this boy." What's the gender of the surgeon? And I sat there and I was like, what are the things? What are the combinations? And so my brother's a surgeon. I know a lot of surgeons, right? Because of him. But my instinct was to say, oh, it's a male. And the answer was actually no. It was the mom that was in the surgery room. I don't know that I explained it perfectly well, but the point is I'm a woman. I care deeply about women's rights. And here I was still saying that the surgeon defaulted to male. And I think the way that we contradict those biases is by actually being around more and more of those people that contradict the various stereotypes that we might actually hold. And that is a very intentional process that we actually have to cultivate, and we have to work hard on. And that's how we rewire ourselves. And if we're going to get through this moment as America transitions to a minority majority country, and all of the different important things around minority rights, and Los Angeles now, unfortunately, LA Times ran a headline February 1st that shows that Los Angeles is the leader in hate crimes in the nation, which is like not the title that I want for Los Angeles or anywhere in the nation for that matter. But the point is this problem's not getting better, it's getting worse. And if we're going to get ahead of this, we need to be able to get people with differing backgrounds in front of each other, lots of them, not one or two, of whatever the opposite or the stereotype is. And we need people to be able to truly get to know the nuance behind the person and to stop categorizing, exceptionalizing people.
I totally agree. I think that those intra-communal conversations are very important. Our ability to challenge our own perceptions and stereotypes is incredibly important. It's great that all this anti-bias work is taking place, even though there is effort to just erase all of it in the name of, I don't know, opposing this curriculum or that curriculum. Nonetheless, I think that Jews and Muslims and all the other groups also really owe it to themselves to know a little bit more about their own history, about their own identity, about their own heritage. I think that something that happens is that sometimes we are overeager to jump in and to participate in dialogues and getting to know others, which is something that we should all try to do. But I also think that we get more out of the dialogue and out of the engagement when we are fully aware of our own backgrounds and we understand our own culture and heritage and where we have been. Where we are coming from, because ultimately what happens in some of these conversations is that there's a lot of pain. There is a lot of anger sometimes. There is a lot of mistrust. And I think that, and some people just have it, they don't even know why they have these sentiments. Maybe they have learned it from their parents, maybe they have learned it from the media or wherever. But these sentiments that are not always very comfortable, they definitely are within us. But if we get to study our own past and delve into some of the difficult moments in our history that have led to the feelings that we share collectively as a community. We will be better equipped to articulate to the other where we're coming from. And dialogue is all about empathy. And in order to communicate, these feelings, it is important to know your history so that you can engage in a truly empathetic way with the others. And also when you know your own background, your own culture, your own history of suffering and struggles, you will also be more open to understanding the other side. And I believe it would create a more constructive conversation. Does it make sense to you, Aziza? Do you know what I'm talking about here?
Very much so. So like it's spot on. So there's this book called My Grandmother's Hands, and I highly recommend people reading it. And he talks about if we really want to, we have to know ourselves as we're talking to other people. We really have to know ourselves so that we can heal, because we're all carrying so much stuff that's like an unhealed, dirty pain that's with us. And by dirty, like he describes it really well in unpacking things, but like he says that there's the clean pain when you directly look at that history that you're talking about, Marjan, and really looking at it and examining it and countering and like actually exploring it, and then you start to heal from it. And it doesn't control you and your actions in a way that operates in the background. Instead, it's something that you are fully seeing and you're able to name, because this is all a process and it takes a lot of effort. And the more we know each other and ourselves, the more we actually can understand each other. Because when I'm a rooted, solid tree, like I can actually connect with another and nourish without feeling like I'm at the whims of the wind, because I'm anchored.
That's a beautiful analogy. I love the analogy of the tree, and I totally agree. And we can also bear the better fruits when we are deeply rooted. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So speaking of, roots and kind of reaching out to other communities, and we sort of see that being the emphasis in the film. It really emphasizes the film really focuses on the dialogue and the bringing together of Jewish and Muslim communities. But we also there's another current through the film that is sort of used to punctuate time, which is these news clips of various hate and terrorist attacks against Jewish and Muslim communities and other acts of hate. And both of you mentioned kind of trauma and healing, and we hear that come up in the conversations that the sisters are having when they're talking about the Israel and Palestine conflict. But we kind of also see trauma happening to them in real time as they're grappling with these violent events that are taking place in real time. I wondered what the two of you thought of the way that the film intercut these kind of lovely community building moments with these violent events that are taking place as the film is being made.
Yeah, I mean, it unfortunately shakes you right into an awful reality that, I would rather not believe that it's true. And yet it is. And it's so deeply painful. And I know from personal experience that relationships that have reached out to me, and when I've shown up for other people, there's something that happens where we all become more resilient. And these relationships aren't just, lip service. They're not just fluff. They're nice to have. They're essential in actually nurturing our ability to have resilience and to be able to make it through and figure out how to even own and tell our own story. Because, you know, when you go through these moments of trauma, right, and you actually lose your ability to even like speak, like you might want to yell, you want to like, you know, scream at the top of your lungs, and it's so hard to tell your story. And when you're there with your friends, like you're witnessing, you're holding, and you're trying to find a way through together, and somehow it just gives you your feet again. Like I remember being at my mosque here in Los Angeles, and there was a threat, and a credible threat that LAPD was intervened with, and I just remember being in the lobby of the Islamic Center, and like my legs were shaking, because like I've always been an activist. I've always been a relationship builder. That is who I am. But now I'm a mom, and I started to have questions about like, whoa, like you cannot jeopardize your own safety, because now you have to be there for your children. Like the equation just changed considerably. And I remember Rabbi Susan Goldberg called me and she said, I heard it on the news, I will be there. And in that moment when I was questioning myself and whether or not I should be in the mosque, she showed up with her family, her kids, her most precious, the very ones I wanted to protect. And she said, I'm with you. And that is what helps me own my space again. And it's mine and it's ours together, because we stand next to each other.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Absolutely. And I hope that we will see more moments of solidarity and less moments of trauma, so that we can still be there for one another without having to endure horrible events. And so as a Jewish person, for me, the recent events, and I know that the movie could not have captured it, because unfortunately hate in our communities are continuing, and if there were, second or third or more episodes or more volumes of this movie, there would still be content, unfortunately, to capture these problems. But for me right now, the experience of Colleyville, the hostage taking of parishioners in a Texas synagogue is still very real to me, and the fear that the community must have felt, and the conversations around me about whether it would be safe to go to the synagogue this weekend or not, and the fact that people still are asking themselves questions whether they should be going to the synagogue or not. And our religions are very communal religions. It's all about being together. These places of worship exist because there is power in the community. There is compassion and strength in the community. But right, first with COVID, and now with these multiple threats, these places are transforming. There was an article today or yesterday about how places of worship have to realize the new reality that they may have to just be virtual platforms, and what that does to worship. Whatever may be the cause, I think that if any of you have friends from a different background, and you see that their communities are under siege, I think it really goes such a long way to receive that phone call, to receive that message. I'm thinking about you. I know what you're going through. I'm your friend. I will, these expressions of friendship and solidarity go a very long way. You don't have to agree with all of their politics. You don't have to agree with their perspectives or the person or everything, but just on a human to human level, I think we need to acknowledge that these moments are difficult. Another very traumatic experience that we saw both in Los Angeles and New York, and also in other cities in between, when the Jewish people were getting attacked in the streets because of the Gaza conflicts. And I have to tell you that some people were having a very difficult time just being human with one another. It felt like picking up the phone and saying, I'm sorry, your community is going through this difficult experience, would have been taking sides with one part of the conflict versus another. No matter what is happening in the region, I think we have to still remember our own humanity and have the ability to reach out to one another, even if the politics are complicated, even if the conflict and the regional threats are more than we can handle. But on a human to human level, these fears are palpable, and it will feel better. We would feel more trusting and close to our friends and our neighbors if we're able to know that there's someone who accepts us just as human beings that we are, despite all the other big complicated things.
Yeah, I know it's your you would probably want to ask another question, Harmony, but I couldn't agree with this more. Like that personal touch of reaching out to people is essential. It's like it helps us remember that we're not alone. And that isolation is exactly what can just completely destroy and demoralize us. And that's the stuff that hardens our hearts and that we have to guard ourselves from. It's keeping that connection alive. And why, like my good friend Hidab Tarifi was literally at the mayor and city council and LAPD's press conference right following those events that you were describing, Marjan. And she's from Gaza, and she said, like, this is not okay. This is not okay. Like, violence, not okay at all. And that's all the way through. And yes, like it can feel so tricky with taking sides, and like we know that everyone deserves human dignity and to be safe and to be able to worship freely, and that's why it's essential to keep showing up, even and especially when it is hard to do so.
I'm going to add something else to it, and I really appreciate your words, Aziza. I think what happens is that, again, because of this division and antagonism that is so common in the atmosphere of America these days, I think people are also afraid of saying things publicly because they don't know what kind of backlash they're going to experience at home with their own groups, and how they will be judged. And that's why it is so important to be able to break the barriers, even with our own communities, and have conversations about, just begin talking again. Like even on social media, I spend a lot of time on social media, and I can tell you that people are even afraid of clicking a like on something that may be perceived in a different way, or they may, and they're afraid of their own people, if they're afraid of their own communities, or political parties, and how this one little like would be perceived. When did understanding become taboo? When did an outreach become taboo? When did it become forbidden for us to we don't always have to agree, but at least we should try to understand. That's a basic thing, and we should feel courage to do it. We should not be afraid of doing that.
Exactly. The courageous conversations, they're so few and far between and so essential. Yeah, everything from, the like on whatever the social media platform is, to just, and that's why I think it's still important to be able to pick up the phone, or if we need to, we can do it on Zoom. Like, it is doable, it is possible in that one-on-one, but that we're doing it. And it's not just a vacuum, because where there is a vacuum, someone else is going to fill in the story, and the story is going to be canceled or whatever it is. And like, that's the story that we have to make sure that our stories are being told.
Yep, taking control of our own narrative, absolutely.
I'm just happy to be here listening to that exchange. You've both really made some very insightful observations on a wide range of topics. I think we're about to turn it over to the audience for questions, but I think we have time for just one more question from me. And I'll just put it, why do you think it was a sisterhood? What are the merits of holding space for this kind of interfaith dialogue for women specifically?
I'm going to jump in and answer this, take a stab at this one first. I was thinking about this whole notion of interfaith dialogue, and it seems like these days, the interfaith dialogues that you hear about and that get any airtime is the interfaith dialogue that happens between the clergy, who are mainly men, right? It's the imam, it's the rabbi, it's the priest. Generally speaking, they're men, and they're the ones who are who happen to be in relatively more power positions that of their own communities than the women, and I have found myself, listening to the rabbi and the imam and the priest have the conversation with one another, and lead that and set an example of what they want to say, what it is about. But they have created a lot of these rules of what these conversations can be about. But when women are engaging in conversations, yes, of course, they're also dads, they're also husbands, they also have different roles and roles in their personal lives. But there's just something else that happens when women get together. And I really don't want to engage in gendered bias or dismiss what the men are doing. But I think that because as women, we are the guardians of the families. We are guardians of the culture of the family. We are the ones who set the tone for what the culture and the language that is being spoken in the family is all about. I think we can extend it. We can communicate it to our children and to our families in a different way, on a more human and a more personal level than the top level that men tend to practice. Again, I really don't want to engage in gender bias, but there's just something that also is true about my religion. That religion is handed from women to her children. There are many explanations, many reasons for it, but again, the woman is the one who takes care of the family primarily, and a lot of the values that are taught by the mothers to the children. And in these kind of conversations, I think that these women are the mothers of the communities that they're nurturing together, and there's beauty in that. Aziza, what did you think?
There is beauty in that, and there's just something special when women come together. I, mentioning at the top end, like how beautiful it was to hear Tahara do the call to prayer, and like it's just so beautifully moving. And I mean, the only time I've done it is in the company of other women at the women's mosque, and to do the call to prayer. And I've been asked at churches to do the call to prayer. And I'm like, I can't, and that's something that I work through, right? And there's something. All these barriers that get imposed, and figure out where we fit in between all of this and owning our voices. Somehow those barriers kind of dissolve when women are in the company of other women, and you can see a leadership and hear a beauty that you might not otherwise get to hear because of all sorts of reasons, including self-muting. And so there's something else that happens with gender where when we're owning our own stories, and as women, we're telling the stories, and we can tell the story from the heart and use the brain, right? But the emphasis only on the logic doesn't always have to be there, right? It can be a mix of both. And I'm not saying that guys only focus on the logic, but they're so frequent that I can be in spaces and you don't get to hear the dance of both the brain and the heart. And I feel like when I'm in women's spaces, I get to enjoy that part. even more so. And I will say my New Ground focuses on men and women and people of they, like she, he, they, like wherever you fit on the spectrum, like that's what New Ground brings people together. I'm just appreciating that now that I'm in my 40s, I really do appreciate the company of women.
Especially women who are willing to be open and to share of their experiences and talk without judgment and listen without judgment.
Precisely.
Yeah, I thought of what you mentioned earlier in this conversation, Aziza, about self-muting yourself, as that would definitely be less prevalent in a all-female space. Women are so often socialized to shrink themselves and to quiet themselves in co-ed spaces, and that there could be greater openness in an all-female space where more people are willing to unmute and be their full selves. And I think that's really wonderful.
And I think that men should also engage in these dialogues too. They should definitely participate in these dialogues too. You know, there's maybe the next chapter of the film would be about the brotherhood, you know, of these conversations and what are some of the things that they talk about. I really wonder, you know, and I can imagine also some amazing conversations could be brought up about the shared role and challenges that men experience as breadwinners, as protectors, feeling vulnerable about protecting your family when, you know, in face of threats and terror. You know,
I think you should reach out to the filmmakers and pitch a brotherhood movie. Well, I think we'll turn this over now to the audience to take some questions from them. So for our audience, if you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll get to as many as we can. Let's see, there's a few already. Well, here's one that sort of feeds into what we were just talking about. It's lovely that women are able to have these difficult conversations. What are your thoughts on the possibilities for men to do so? So Marjan, you just answered a little bit of that, but Aziza, do you want to take a stab at that as well?
Oh, happy to. So, I mean, as part of New Ground, we operate something for professionals and for high school students. And it's for the very same reasons that Marjan was saying, that a lot of the interfaith dialogue has really been amongst the clergy, and you need everybody actually engaging in this, and people who are lay leaders, etc. And because this is a muscle that we want everyone to have. And the more we exercise the muscle, like the stronger we become at having these conversations and confronting our own bias within ourselves. And so that's why New Ground really does dedicate to actually, you know, people from all sorts of wherever you fit in the spectrum, right? And it's interesting. So my husband belongs to a group that is only like male businessmen, and it's the amount of the ability for them to actually dive into supporting each other and healing hasn't really existed in some of the mixed gender spaces. And so here I am, like, I can't tell you, like, I'm like one of the strongest, like I very strongly believe in women's rights in every possible level, and I have for a very long time. But as I'm kind of starting to appreciate that sometimes all male groups and all female groups can have their value, and and they're actually really important. And I have seen them succeed with the right leadership and with the right container, and it is essential to invest in them, and just to make sure that they're not coming at the cost of another. So they can still thrive. And they definitely have their value. And we can, I think the issue is really actually comes down to the leadership of who's holding the container and how you're creating space for everyone in the room.
Speaking of creating space for everyone in the room, we have a question from the audience. who noticed that the Jewish leadership within the Sisterhood of Salaam Shalom didn't seem to actively being engaging Jews of color. So I wonder if either of you might want to address the importance of, not just creating, we sort of talked about intra-faith community building, but the importance of making sure that within your own faith community that you're holding space and welcoming people of all backgrounds.
I did not want to make assumptions about, the hundreds of women who are participating in the sisterhood program and say that, well, I didn't see any representation of Jews like me in the groups, but at least in the movie, I did not see it. And, like I said, I have a reaction to the call to prayer. I have an experience with the call to prayer because I lived in an Islamic country for the formative years of my life, and that creates a reaction in me. And I would have imagined that, if they had Jews like me, or if they have Jews like me participating in these kinds of conversations, maybe there will be a different layer to what is being discussed, and what are some of the narratives and feelings that are being shared. I'm not making assumptions about the process. Let's hope that they had Middle Eastern Jews, Black Jews, Asian Jews, others in the mix, because we are not a monolith as a community. But in the movie, I did not see that representation.
Yeah, I think this is actually really essential that, even as new ground, like we've had people, Jews of color, Muslims of color, and there is an important aspect of leadership is having special or making sure that we're having a concerted effort, and that it's not just one of our blind spots, that, it's like, it happens if it happens. Like, I think it's important, it's essential. And we need to, and they enrich our space. Like, I know many Jews of color and Muslims of color who have said, yes, I believe in like our synagogues and mosques being like, I want to have a safe space for my family to worship. And when we have armed security guards at the front, et cetera, like I actually feel less safe. And having the conversation and dealing with all the complexities of it is part of really what it means to build relationship. And these are important things. And so I agree wholeheartedly. And people didn't fully identify as one or the other. So I could maybe be making assumptions in the film too. And I do have to highlight one thing. Andrea Hudas wrote, she's one of the women who actually was leading the Jewish prayer at the beginning of the film. And she said one of her favorite things in the New Ground space is seeing male vulnerability. And that's really true. Like when we can create the conditions for everyone just to be their vulnerable selves, we all win.
Well said. Well said. And it goes back to what I said also about, needing to feel a little bit uncomfortable in order to put yourself in a place of learning. I think so many of us in our own political, cultural, communal silos, quarantine or not, we have found a comfortable place that feels safe to us, and we don't want to break out of it. We feel threatened and uncomfortable when we break out of this, whether it is fear of a virus or fear of a different opinion. But it is really time for us to come out and to experience and show a little bit of immunity and a little bit more resilience to differences and to other opportunities and ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a little follow-up statement from the person who asked that question, who says that one of the things that they have appreciated about the Sisterhood of Salaam Shalom is that there's frequent meetings and regular contact. So you have the time to really continue to engage and continue to grow with these people, but that they have continued to not see a lot of diversity in their community, and they're hopeful that that will improve. So we wish them luck in their group. We have a question here from Deborah, who says that she gets shut down when she speaks up for the other within her own community, and she's asking for some advice about how to approach that within her community.
It's hard. It's hard, and I have experienced it too. And so many. I'm on a PTA chat, and so many people are afraid of talking because even the PTA chat has become a hostile environment, and people are afraid of communicating. Either their pure, simple opinions, let alone standing up for others. I think that one thing that could be helpful is to have one-on-one conversations. I think that, depending on the level of hostility and antagonism that you may be experiencing in your own group, I don't know what kind of group you're talking about anyway. I think depending on the level of hostility, you may want to avoid being jumped at, by a whole group of people, and instead try to have a cup of coffee with someone, and just like connect with one individual on a one-on-one level, and have a conversation with another person, just small conversations, pick up the phone. And, some of these chats are very toxic, and it's not a good place for engaging in a meaningful advocacy, and I think one-on-one conversations are very helpful, and so that when you are physically going to a larger group and are conversing with others, you both have the personal relationship with those individuals, with some of the individuals around you, but also you will have the tools to communicate with them in a way that they will hear you. Aziza, what do you think?
I think you got it exactly what I would have said. And there's something different happens when somebody one-on-one and you're able to talk to them. Like you're able to ask questions and to seek understanding from a place of curiosity, that in front of a group, somebody might actually be performing for other people in the group, whether or not they know it. And when we're actually able to ask people questions that are truly from a place of curiosity, we can start to understand and then also shift the way we're saying things just a little bit, so that we're still true to who we are and we are respectful of the concern that they're bringing up.
Awesome.
It's about time to wrap up, but I just want to offer the two of you the opportunity, if you have any parting thoughts that you would want to share with our audience.
Okay, I'll go first. I think I want to commend all the women, all the Muslim and the Jewish women who came together to literally take a leap of faith to participate in these dialogues. I want to commend them for their courage, for their openness, for their hope in what could be. I'm sure that these conversations were challenging, were difficult. I'm sure that there's a lot of unknowns and unsaids. There's still a lot of probably lack of trust, and mistrust and uncertainty in the whole process. But I think that given the difficult, challenging, untrusting, and hateful world that we have around us, we have to begin somewhere. We have to begin somewhere with our humanity, in order to understand and recognize and appreciate the humanity and the dignity of others. It's going to be hard for us to arrive at a place of full agreement and full understanding of the millennia of history that we have experienced, the millennia of pain and suffering that we have experienced. But I think that we need to start somewhere and sometime, and what better time than now? Take a leap, give it a try, pick up the phone, get to know someone, and educate yourself about your own identity, about your culture, and about your own background.
Well said. With me, you always go from strength to strength. That was so beautifully said. I think back to what you said earlier, Marjan, about, sometimes you're uncomfortable, you're really uncomfortable. And your legs don't always want to support you sometimes, even when you're trying to take a courageous step. And if I mentioned the Two Faiths, One Prayer video, and that's actually where the inspiration came from, the joint prayer at the beginning of this film. And when the fellows who went through our program, when we asked them to, over the course of a retreat, they were supposed to lead Shabbat services, and they were supposed to lead a Muslim prayer service. And they were so worried about whether or not they could still hold true to their own services that they prayed their services completely separately, like before they actually led it as a joint prayer, because they were worried about the integrity of it. But then as they were doing it, they realized, because they were actually praying separately, that they could still be their own authentic selves, praying side by side, holding their own space. And that's where they grew their strength, because they were still firm in who they were, and there was still plenty of space for everybody else. And so I'm just going to put that video in the chat. So I encourage you to watch it and to share and to hopefully like it. But I think that's part of the risk, right? Is that we're willing to take a risk, we're willing to hold courage, we're willing to step forward, and we have to start talking about the things that matter to us. It's vital that we do. I've been spending so much time thinking about, how do we really counter anti-Semitism? How do we really counter Islamophobia in ways that really are effective? And so there was this campaign that happened some time ago in Time magazine, and it's called the I Am Your Protector. And they highlighted stories of Muslims who helped save lives during the Holocaust. And there was a shift that happened from where people were saying, like, yes, like, this is our history. This is our source of pride, and owning it in a completely different way. And our students who went through our high school program a couple of years ago worked with the Righteous Conversations Project, which works with Holocaust survivors. And they built a film called Seeds of Partnership. I'm also dropping it in the chat. And really the premise here is, like, it was a Muslim and a Jewish relationship that helped save lives during in this particular video that happened during World War II. It's the relationship, one pushing the other at times when they wanted to give up, and then still pushing forward. But it was that relationship that kept them going. And because of it, they were able to make a huge difference. And so that is my hope, that our relationships help push us to become our better selves and to push forward in ways that truly, truly look at anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and find a way to say, no, there is another way, and there's something proud in our history that says that we can stand together and we can make sure that people are all belong and they're all safe.
Beautiful. Aziza, I could keep talking to you for a couple more hours, but what I just want to say here, because it is so true, and I, because I'm Iranian, I have to also mention that there were so many righteous Muslims who had an instrumental role in giving visas to Jews during the Holocaust. So many of the righteous Muslims that you're talking about were Iranians, who assisted some Jews, to save their lives. And they are marked in our history, and they're also role models. for Iranians of all religions. And I think that having these role models who are willing to stand up for one another, is another thing that can give strength to our communities mutually, so that we can stand up against Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and all forms of hate. I had to mention that about the righteous Muslims who are Iranian.
No, absolutely. So appreciated. Actually, the relationship is because it's actually of Sardari and Muradi, who are both
You got
Iranians.
it.
Yes.
And then also the Iranian community who received them. Okay, that was also something to mention.
Well, thank you both so much. It's really been just an honor and a pleasure to listen and learn and talk with the two of you. I hope I'm sure our audience feels the same way. I want to say thank you to both of you on behalf of Holocaust Museum LA for sharing your time and your insights with us today. As a reminder to our audience, if you have not yet had the opportunity to watch the film link you received will be active through tomorrow, February 17th. Before we sign off, I want to invite everyone to join us virtually on Thursdays at 11 a.m. for our weekly Holocaust Survivor Talks. Tomorrow's survivor speaker will be a survivor named Henry Sluky. You can find more information about our virtual events on our website at holocaustmuseumla.org. Also, a recording of this program will be made available on Holocaust Museum LA's YouTube channel tomorrow. Everyone who registered for this program will receive a link to the YouTube video when it is available via email. Holocaust Museum LA brings you programs like today's at no charge. If you are enjoying our programs, please consider supporting our work by becoming a member. To learn more about our membership levels and benefits, visit holocaustmuseumla.org/membership. Thank you again to Aziza, to Marjan, and to all of you for joining us today. Take care, and we hope to see you again soon. We hope you can join us virtually or in person at the museum. The museum is open Thursdays through Mondays. We are closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful.
Thank you both. This was really just a terrific conversation.
Thank you for moderating us, Harmony.
You're welcome.
In harmony.
Indeed, exactly.
Yes, a fitting name for this conversation.
Yes.